Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Black Health Trust. We're so happy you chose to spend some time with us, and we are going to have a speaker that is familiar to you talking about a subject that is familiar to you. And without further ado, I turn it over to our founder, Dr. Randall Maxey.
Thank you very much, Dr. Barbara Davis Stevens. How you doing, Dr. Ivan Walks? And thank you, Simon. I hope Dr. Lawson's on.
Dr. Hines is
Dr. And Dr. Hines. Oh, I'm sorry. Hey, Dr. Hines, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I want to wish everybody, our moderators and our audience, happy Mother's Day. And I heard a very good Mother's Day story at church today. I just want to make it very short. But there was a man in the Bible named John, and they had sentenced him to die. And he was supposed to die at 12 noon the next day when the bell tolled. And the next day, they brought him out of his prison cell and they put him on his knees and put his head on the chopping block. And at 11:59, they had him waiting. And at 12 noon, the bell didn't toll. At 12:02, the bell still hadn't tolled. So at 12:05, the judge says, well, if the bell didn't toll, you can't kill him. You have to let him go. And he started walking out. He's looking for his mother, and he couldn't find his mother. Somebody said, we saw her go up the steps to the church where the bell is. He ran up the steps, and where the bell was, there was his mother. She was holding onto the bell clapper. She was dead, but she had held the bell, so they couldn't kill her son. That was a mother. So that was our Mother's Day message today. We all know that nobody goes more for us to take care of us than our mothers. So happy and honored Mother's Day to all the mothers. We all wouldn't be here without them, not only at birth, but all through life. So we have a distinguished speaker today. She's a pediatrician. She's board certified. She works in the managed care area. I happen to have known her since she was a teenager, when she was a very gifted young student who later went to Boston, went to Harvard, graduated from Tufts Medical School, and became a faculty member at Meharry Medical College. And now she is a co-host of the Black Health Trust. And I'd like to present, without further ado, Dr. Barbara Neighbor Stevens. And
Thank
she's going to talk about infections and protecting our children.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maxey, my friend and mentor. And I am, as always, honored to be given an opportunity to serve. And today I've been asked to serve in giving some thoughts around how to protect our children. Now, actually, from a scientific point of view, this is a very short talk. Now, what we may spend much more time talking about is why things are not working. And I think that deserves some discussion. This country was shocked. You can start the slide, Simon. This country was shocked several months ago now with a measles outbreak in Texas. But I would suggest, I would hope, that none of our regular listeners were surprised at all, because our audience knows a lot about what it takes to protect yourself. We have spent almost 5 years talking about how to protect yourself. And the fact that we had this problem pop out in Texas should not have been a surprise. The only thing about it is the timing of it, because we should have known that we were like a time bomb waiting to go off. we have lived through this phenomenon in this country of discrediting science and discrediting medicine and discrediting, in particular, vaccines. So when you decide to go down the path of no vaccinations, it's just a matter of time. And so here we are. And our most vulnerable population is, of course, the one that is suffering first. They won't be the last. And this is not going to be the only disease that we're going to have to deal with. In particular, we're going to talk about a little bit about measles and whooping cough. But what I really want us to talk about is why are we where we are? Because if we don't understand why we are where we are, we will not be successful in turning this ship around. And I am going to suggest that it may not be all of what the obvious answers to that question might be. And I will stipulate that some of what I am going to say, and I'll identify it when I say it, I cannot document with research at this point. But what I can say is this is how I see it, and let's see if it doesn't play out the way I'm saying that I see it. So the next slide, Simon. I think we can go to the next one. So as of May 8th, there have been 1,001 measles cases reported by the CDC. Let me draw a line under reported because as with COVID and many other diseases, all they can count is what is reported. They can't count what's not reported. And I'm here to tell you there's more than 1,001 cases out there. They just haven't been reported. It started in Texas. And we've had an increase in pertussis, otherwise known as whooping cough. As of April 26, there have been 9,047 cases of whooping cough or pertussis. And the increase began again in Texas, although there are several hotspots now, not the least of which is on the West Coast. And just to give you some perspective, in April of 2025, there were 4,700 cases of whooping cough. So clearly, we are seeing a significant rise, which rises to almost the level of epidemic. Now, what are the contributing factors that are frequently cited? Vaccine hesitancy and the decreased rate of immunization post-pandemic. That's actually not totally accurate. The immunization rates fell during the pandemic, at the beginning, starting at the beginning of the pandemic. And I do believe that that is not accidental. And we'll hopefully discuss that. Next slide, please. So I had measles. And I remember having measles. I was 5 years old, sick as a dog. My children all had chickenpox. But physicians, young physicians now have not seen these diseases. I did not have mumps, or at least you can't have subclinical mumps. I never had what was recognized to be mumps. But I did have rubella during the epidemic when it seemed like everybody in the world had rubella, and we all went to school together so that we made sure that we all got it at the same time and got through with it. We don't have any of those, we have not had any of those kinds of outbreaks since we've had the vaccines developed that will prevent these diseases. So you want to understand why scientists work so hard to develop the vaccines in the first place. Well, I kind of gave you a hint a minute ago when I said when I had measles, I was sick as a dog.
Mm.
Measles is a very uncomfortable disease. It is accompanied by fever, and when you have a fever, usually you have a headache, a severe headache if you get one of the common complications of measles, which is an inflammation of the brain, which also can lead to some other issues. You can get cough. Sometimes ear infections can occur, which will result in deafness, permanent deafness. It's not you can get pneumonia with it. It is not an illness that you would wish anybody that you love to have. Pertussis, whooping cough, is similar. I treated several children with whooping cough in the early years of my practice. And it was heartbreaking. These children coughed, and you thought they were going to cough their guts out. And after they would have these paroxysms of coughing, they could barely get their breath. A lot of complications can come from whooping cough as well. Generally, it was not fatal, but it could be fatal in the very young or those who had comorbid conditions. How a parent, to me, this is where I'm going off the data and my observations. How a parent who has seen a child go through what they go through with either measles, chicken pox, or whooping cough would intentionally leave them vulnerable to these diseases, to me, is beyond reason. But it is the same lack of rationality that we saw during COVID. So I'm thinking that it is more than vaccine fear. I maintain that there's some other dynamics at play. And one of the dynamics in play, well, let me make this statement as a pediatrician that practiced before COVID. Parents might not do a lot of the things they should do in terms of health maintenance visits. But when they had their babies, they were generally pretty good about bringing them in, at least for the first 6 months. And it would drop off a little bit for that annual first birthday checkup. But they still were above 95% in bringing their kids somewhere. If not to a pediatrician's office, they would go to the health department because there were multiple places where they could access the vaccines. Also, at that time, if they wanted their child to go to daycare, they couldn't enroll them in daycare if they didn't have their vaccines. And if they wanted them to go to school, again, they couldn't go to school. And the schools were or the states, I should say, were uniformly in line around maintaining that requirement that you have vaccine completion of your mandatory vaccines. So there were societal things that supported the parent, aside from the parent's desire that their child not suffer, to encourage visitation to the doctor. But since COVID, everything has blown up. The states are not very adamant at all about maintaining vaccine requirements. They have assumed I was trying to think of the right word to say. They have assumed the position of many now in federal government that are not vigorously supporting vaccines. But I also think, and this is where I'm really not, I don't have data, but what I do know is family lifestyle has radically changed. And I highly suspect that there has been a change in the way families conduct family business. Now, I'm not talking about the employment because that hasn't really changed in a long time, generations, at least two generations, maybe three generations, going back to World War II. Women started working outside of the home. But I think that there are practices within families that may be changing. I know that attendance to church has changed, has decreased. I know that family mealtime has, together, I mean, has changed and decreased. And so I'm thinking that the perspective of the parent about what they absolutely need to do for their child versus what they might do for their child, especially if there are no consequences, particularly if they don't, that they can see, may also be contributing to this lax attitude around vaccinations. Next slide. Now, okay, measles is very, very contagious. Yes, indeed it is. If you were in a room with somebody who had measles, a good proportion of the people that were in that room would probably, and they were not immunized, would probably come down with measles. And in fact, where we've had the hot spots in measles around the country has been where there has been a significant drop in the level of people who are immunized, therefore a drop in the so-called herd immunity that exists in that community. And so they are coming, people who are not vaccinated are coming in contact with infected people, and you have the makings of an epidemic. Because measles lingers in the air for so long, you don't have to necessarily be with them uh, to get it. You can just come where they were and still get it. Now, I'm preaching to the choir here because you know where I'm going next. If you know you're in an area where there is an increased incidence of measles, you're not sure of your vaccine status, from our experience with COVID, which was another highly contagious virus, we know what to do. Unfortunately, there is no treatment for measles. Now, you can do some supportive things if the individual is requiring fluids and stuff like that, but there is no drug to cut short, despite what is being said in various places by people who have no information to support their position, namely that you can cure measles by taking vitamin A. And I'm going to speak to that in just a second. We know that we need to be careful now that we've got a new crop of viruses, that again, transmission is super easy when you're in close proximity to them. The word I want to give on vitamin A, and I'm dead serious about this, you can cause all kinds of problems by taking too much vitamin A. You know, too much of any good thing can be bad. And vitamin A is no exception to that rule. So please do not take vitamin A without specific guidance from someone who knows how to use that particular, it's a drug. We call it a vitamin, but it's a drug. Next slide, please. Measles vaccine is, we have a combined vaccine of measles, mumps, and rubella. And this is one that we try to give the first one at 12 months, and the next one is given at 15 months, depending on maybe what the family may be doing, like travel outside of the country or something. We may give it a month earlier, like at 11 months. But generally, we like to give it at 12 months. And then the booster dose is given at 15 months. And then down the road, when you get ready to go to high school, guess what? It's time to get another one. It is very effective, but I'm not aware of any vaccine that is 100%. And the same goes for MMR, which has about a 97% effectiveness after 2 doses. You need to have at least 95% of people vaccinated in order to achieve herd immunity. And in those communities where there has been the outbreak, their herd immunity has been lost because the vaccine rates in those areas have dropped. Next slide, please. Whooping cough is, as I said, one that if you watch a little baby going through these coughing fits, it breaks your heart. And much to the surprise of my parents, not my personal parents, my patient parents, I would warn them about taking their young babies, their newborns specifically, out into crowded environments because you don't know the immunization status of the people that you're running around with, and they needed to be careful about who they brought into their home. And you definitely needed to be careful about who you allowed to pick up your baby and kiss on them. Grandparents were a known reservoir of whooping cough because depending on how old those grandparents are, they may not have had immunizations for whooping cough when they were children. Most likely, they had not had any of the boosters that are recommended every 10 years as adults. And so that loving grandparent who would be mortified to know that they were the source of this infection could very well be the vehicle for the infection of that newborn who was too young to receive their first immunization. There are recommendations now about giving pregnant women certain vaccines to boost their immunization status so that their antibodies can cross the placenta and help protect the baby in those the first months. But still, you need to be very careful and aware of the risk of picking up whooping cough in older individuals. I mentioned earlier what some of the side effects can be. They can get pneumonia. Now, if a child develops pneumonia from Bordetella pertussis, they can be treated with antibiotics. Maybe it shortens the course, but the ideal for sure is to prevent them from getting it in the first place. Next slide, please. Here is the vaccine schedule for pertussis, which is combined with diphtheria. And you're saying, diphtheria, what is that? Yeah, you haven't heard of it because we've been having the vaccine for so long, but it used to be really common. And then tetanus, you rarely hear about anybody getting tetanus unless they stepped on a rusty nail or something. But you almost never hear about it in children because they used to get their DPT. I know it is DPT, now they call it DTP. But that's because of the composition of the vaccine, and they've changed it over the years. And as I alluded to earlier, boosters are recommended about every 11 or 12 years. Next slide, please. Vulnerable age groups. Well, if the baby is young, they haven't been vaccinated, so they're susceptible. people who have underlying comorbid conditions, they are susceptible, especially if they have any of the chronic conditions that can leave them immunosuppressed. Also, we don't talk about this much, but if you're on chemotherapy, you need to talk to your doctor about what you need to be aware of and what you need to do. Now, once you're on some of the chemotherapy agents, you actually can no longer have the vaccine, but if you are under immunized, you are still at risk for catching the diseases. So you need to have the conversation with your treating physicians about what precautions you need to take. Next slide. What can I say? The only prevention strategy is to get your vaccine. There's some things you need to do that may help lessen your chance, but if you want to really prevent it, you need to get the vaccine. Next slide. We talked about this. What I didn't comment on is there have been 3 measles deaths so far, 2 kids and 1 adult that have been reported. Next slide, please. That may be the last one. No. Well, we talked about herd immunity before. We can go on to the next one. Okay, let's stop here a minute. And actually, if possible, could we open up the mics? Because if there's any confusion about this, I want us to have a conversation and try to clear up any misunderstandings about this issue. Are there any questions in the chat? Any comments that my co-moderators want to make?
Well, I just wanted to chime. You touched on a really number of things with regard to reasons why and reasons behind, but I also just wanted to kind of add to the list, right? I would imagine that in general, parents of younger children are likely to be Generation Z and millennials, right? Who, as a cohort, challenge authority, right? They challenge the status quo. They have a different approach and mindset to things. And I think you brought up a really good point, Dr. Nabert-Stevens, about you have a whole bunch of people who have no connection to some of the diseases that these vaccinations are preventing. So the impact, like you're talking about, the severity, the seeing that level of distress, that's missing for a lot of people to kind of make that, parental connection space, as well as just a general mindset shift. And then as you said too before, the level of policy changes and requirements that are lax mixed in with care interruptions, right? Because lots of these are a series. So if you miss some of those childhood well child visits, which for the most part, lots of parents are like, it's just to get shots. So do I need shots? If I don't need shots, I'm not coming, right? And then last, I will throw in the rise of telehealth. The rise of telehealth creates another opportunity for people to miss vaccinations because you can't get a vaccine via telehealth. So I just wanted to throw in some of the some additional thoughts on some of the systemic reasons behind some of these behavior changes, in addition to all the things that were already said.
Thank you. You really have helped to underscore that there is certainly vaccine hesitancy, but that is not the only dynamic in play. And it's still, maybe Dr. Walks can help me with this. If 1 million people die from COVID, wouldn't that suggest that it might be necessary to get a vaccine? I still cannot understand the thinking, line of thinking. I mean, it'd be one thing if maybe 50 people had died of a disease. Maybe you could brush it off, maybe. But 1 million people, I cannot, I have not been able yet to understand that thinking process.
Uh, Dr. Nabert Stevens, I'm so glad that words matter and you chose your words so carefully because what I just heard you say was maybe Dr. Walks can help me with this. And that maybe is so helpful. Thank you so much for that. I it is baffling. I have someone that I know um I've known since we were kids. And I was a kid a long time ago. Her husband died from COVID. He was unvaccinated, and she refused to get vaccinated even after he got sick and even after he died from COVID. I couldn't understand that, and I can't help you understand why people don't. I do know that from a psychological perspective, humans are great at following, not so good at leading, and we're really not good at all at picking the right person to follow. And so someone engages with us, someone who is persuasive and tells us things that may or may not be true, and we believe the person. It's not so much we can give them all this good information. We like to believe people. And so we believe people and away we go. So let me help you with something I might be able to be more useful about. In the chat, Linda Hall asked a very important question. I don't remember if I had the measles. I think I did, but I'm 70 years old. Should I get a vaccination? How can I find out if I need to get a vaccination? So what you think, Dr. Nabert Stevens?
Oh, I thought you were going to answer it.
No, no, I like to answer things. Listen, my mother told me a long time ago that if you honestly tell people when you don't know, they'll believe you when you come back and tell them when you do know. So I'd like to maintain my credibility. I don't know.
Okay, well, Dr. Hines wants to give Ms. Hall the answer.
So, in general, if you've received your measles, your measles vaccinations, or you were born before 1957, there is typically not a reason to have to get booster doses or anything like that, unless there are specific circumstances, such as there's immunity, like individual immunity issues. If your immune system is weakened, for example, like Dr. Nabert Stevens mentioned, like chemotherapy or those types of things. If you are in an outbreak area, so for example, if you live in, whatever part of Texas where things are really going on, right? You might want to consider, and your doses were a long, long time ago. You might want to consider getting a booster. And then if you are exposed, that's another scenario where you might want to consider getting a booster. MMR is actually measles, mumps, and rubella. That vaccination actually has something you can test titers for. So you can get a blood draw and see if you are immune. If you are unsure, because a lot of people don't have their vaccination records from when they were children. So you can get a blood test, and the blood test will tell you whether or not you have immunity to measles, mumps, and rubella.
I have a question I'd like to ask. What are the generations, the Z's and X's and generations? Tell me something about those, just so I know.
So give me a minute and I'll give you the years, because there's 15 years roughly between each one. So if somebody wants to do quick math, so 25, right? 2025 started Generation Beta, right? So those kids are less than 1, right? Generation Alpha.
Generation Zeta? Beta?
B. Beta. B as in boy. Beta. Started this year. So I'm just going to work backwards. They started this year. So Generation Alpha They're about 1 to 14 years old right now. So in general, they are not parents yet.
Mostly.
In general, right? There's some exceptions, right? So
Yes,
then generation, and I'm gonna just use rough math. So, it's gonna be off a couple years just because I'm not writing this down. So then the next one is gonna be Generation Z. These are your Zoomers. These are the kids who were born into a digital world, right? So they are like 15 to 30. So they are younger, they are parents, right? They are used to immediate answers. They are used to a different sense of challenging authority. They're hands-on learners. They want to get in there and see things. You have to teach them differently than you would, prior generations. Because I said so is not an acceptable answer for that younger generation. Then you have your millennials. Millennials are also Generation Y, right? They are 30 to 45. So they're the ones that are in the workplace, right? Having, different standards of dress and different standards of communication and causing all kinds of disruption, right, to the status quo, because that's not how they value individuality. They value things like, purpose over money. They were kind of the start of companies having to care about, their stances on things to get people to buy their products, not just the quality of the garment. Then you have X. Generation X is roughly 45 to 60, more or less, right? These are the people, some of them, they're the people running things in a lot of spaces, along with the boomers, right? And they were not digital natives. They are kind of a hybrid. They are very much your classic sandwich generation who's got kids and parents that they're taking care of, especially some of these, adult children that are still at home. They were raised by, boomers. So your boomers are 60 to 75. And then before that, I believe, is the greatest generation, and they are 75 to 90. So in short, the younger you get, the more question for authority, the more access to independent information, good or bad, right? The more social media plays a part, the more influencers are playing a part in how people live their lives, make their decisions, the amount of choice that becomes available to these people, kids, parents, has all grown. They move differently, but still absolutely have, values and a moral compass and those kinds of things. It just might look different. Like, for example, at its root, I think things along the lines of having healthier food and stuff like that, it's true, right? A lot of our food, it does need to be a cause for concern, especially if you look at what some of other developed nations are doing. So while some of us might be more prone to say, well, what did the FDA say on this, and be happy with that, others of us might look and be like, well, I can't trust the FDA because you put it there in the first place. So there is a space for discussion of differing ideas and understanding where different generations are coming from. And I think that's really important if we're going to tackle this problem going forward. The same type of vaccination campaigns that we used in the past may or may not be, we might have to switch strategies a little bit. I don't know, but there's definitely significant differences. And I will also say to you, Dr. Maxey, going forward, because things are changing so quickly, they're talking about reducing the time of a generation to 6 to 7 years, because that's how fast cohorts of people are changing.
Let me bring up a question aimed at Dr. Walks. and this comes from the greatest generation. Is it true that with these later generations playing Grand Theft Auto and all these games, that the mere fact of living, the mere fact of avoiding vaccines and having the threat of dying may not mean the same thing to some of these later groups as they used to? Is death
So,
really all that to these younger groups?
so Dr. Maxey, I will start with my favorite answer, which is I don't know. I will say that I know people that have done dissertations on the impact of video games on the mindset of young children. And I remember I was terrified that my son, who is now an adult, used to like to play a race car game on the television. And he always wanted to drive into the other cars because he thought that that was fun. I'm like, this boy is going to get a driver's license one day, and he doesn't understand. We're supposed to be avoiding the other cars and trying to win the race, not trying to get the largest accident we can. Yeah, he got his license and had an accident. But anyway, he's safe and fine. But there's something about the impact of what we watch, the music we listen to, all of that, that impacts our mindset. And at the same time, what Dr. Hines said about because I said so is not a good answer for some of the younger generations. Because I said so, it used to be kind of helpful, right? Because one of the problems that we have now with respect to vaccination is that you can opt out. The parents can opt out. They can just say, "Well, I'm not sure. I don't. My kid's fine right now. I don't think they need a vaccine." I saw online that the vaccine might kill somebody. One in every 3 million people die from the vaccine, whatever the numbers are, right? But they'll get in the car and drive to the grocery store, and the statistics are much higher that you might get hurt either on the way to the grocery store or at the grocery store. So there have to be some rules because the greater population is served by having a speed limit in front of a school at 25 miles an hour, not however fast you want to go, just make sure you go around the kids. So I think that when we throw out all of the because I said so, and we allow people to opt out of getting their children vaccinated, because I think as Dr. Gibson put in the chat, what happened to the yellow cards? What happened to those vaccination records that you used to have to show to enroll your kid in school? That's where things have gone wrong. We are accepting that I'm not going to do it because you said I have to do it. And we are allowing people not to have rules. And so we are getting this hodgepodge of some places kids are vaccinated and some places they aren't. And that goes back to, I think, maybe your first point, Dr. Neighbor Stevens, about how if everybody is being influenced differently by either influencers or some kind of social media, how do we get a consistently safe and protected society? And what we're seeing right now is, it's kind of hard to do that. Kind of hard to give you freedom of choice and have everybody make the same choice.
Let me just add to that it's getting to the point now. Again, I'm dating myself. I'm sorry, Dr. Maxey, but I am going to date myself a little bit. I went to segregated schools in Memphis, Tennessee. And when integration was enforced, we had a proliferation of either private schools or homeschooling. In fact, every time somebody talks to me about charter school, I flash back to the schools that were started to avoid integration. I mean, I'm not saying that that's necessarily all that was involved, but I'm just saying that was where my mind always goes. Now we have an unprecedented rise in homeschooling and all kinds of little twists and turns on the model. Again, I'm not questioning a parent's right to educate their children the way they feel they need to, as long as they're within the boundaries of law, and law certainly allows for homeschooling, but it also facilitates vaccination avoidance.
Mhm.
Along that line, I have one question as we draw toward the top of the hour. And there was a time when I supported integration and having our children get the public education presented by the society. Given the changes that we've seen recently, I'm rethinking the fact that we need to retake over the education of our children, not necessarily home education, but education that we can do for our people so that we don't let our kids get into the mismanagement situation being put out by certain politics in the country right now. And I'm wondering what some other thoughts might be. Who's teaching our kids now, and what do they teach them? And some of the things that I've read in history, that right as a society goes into the toilet, they start destroying books, they start destroying libraries, they start not teaching them correctly, but teaching them misinformation. And how do we protect our kids from that? Starting with Dr. Neighbor Stevens.
I'm glad you started with me because I was going to jump in. um, let's be careful about remembering our history. The people who are teaching our children now are the people who were teaching our children when integration was implemented. Because the Black teachers were removed from the schools where the Black kids went, even in integration. The Black teachers were taken, at least in the South that I was in, were taken to the former predominantly white, and they still were predominantly white schools. So what I'm saying to you is the lessons that our children have been getting for at least 2 generations now may very well, it may be more highlighted now, maybe more vicious now, but the underlying problem of our children getting the history that they needed to get has been a problem that we as a community has not dealt with adequately for at least 2 generations, I would strongly propose to you. And the answer to that, to me, is the same now as it was and should have been then, which is we take over the responsibility. We have Vacation Bible School, we have the opportunity on Saturdays to have Saturday school. Some of the social organizations tried to step in and ran tutorials on the weekend, especially in reading and math for the younger groups. I don't know how much of that is still going on, but it needs to be going on at a level that we have never seen before. We have the capacity, we just need the will.
Ben,
Dr. Holder has raised her hand, by the way.
Yeah, about the comment on schools, I agree wholeheartedly. We have to step in education. And I think for me, Saturday schools and some of the other ways rather than homeschooling completely, because I find the kids who are homeschooled early, if the parents do not have the resources, their science preparation is just not as good because it takes a lot of money to really do good science prep. And we pay so much money in the taxes for education that I feel we best to get our communities together and do the Saturday schools and also take over as much as we can the boards. There's a whole new movement where there's a parallel board, school board, that the parents created. And that parallel school board helped take care of the needs of the Black kids and the kids who had different needs that were being ignored by the majority school boards. So there are lots of different solutions we need to look at for education, but it's the community context that we have to really bring the collective voice of the communities, because 73% of women work outside the home. So taking on homeschooling is going to be a very difficult thing for a lot of lower wealth, middle income folks to really maneuver well. But we can collectively, I see, find solutions to assist these families on getting the real information.
Can I just jump in here while we're having this discussion? Not because I disagree, right? But just for things to keep in mind. As a parent of a 11 and a 10-year-old, right? If I said Saturday school, I'm competing with sports. I'm competing with playtime. Like when I was a recipient of many of the types of I remember going to the Naval Academy when I was in middle school, and they would do, it was just for, African American kids, and we would go up to Annapolis, and the midshipmen would, we would do math and science and stuff like that. I can remember being a participant in some of the activities that you're talking about. But I also did not have nearly the amount of choices for attention and time that current young people do today. So in the midst of that, right, we would have to put that in a way that says, yeah, put your lacrosse stick down, or yeah, get off the, whatever other, get off your device, stop doing all of the other things that are competing for time and attention on a weekend. Even Vacation Bible School. I went to Vacation Bible School, but I also didn't go to camp. There's if you have the means, right? There's a million different camps you can put your kid into for enrichment, for fun, there's so many options, like I was saying before, of things competing for time and attention. Obviously, as a parent and as an adult and as guiders, it's our role to help people prioritize. But if we're talking about a movement, right, we have to remember how to phrase things in a way that make it appealing. I looked forward to Vacation Bible School when I was a kid because it was fun and that type of thing. But just something to keep in mind, as far as the circumstances that we're in.
That's why we have to go back to because I told you so. Because I told you so is still useful. Anyway, Doctor, I think that's Dr. Who was that?
It's iPhone 28, whoever that is.
That's my friend, Dr. Lawson. Put your camera down, man.
Yeah, I just want to note that I agree with everything that's said, but I also went to a segregated school and saw the good and the bad. The good was, and I listened to folks who went to the integrated schools talking about being mistreated by white teachers and so forth. We didn't have that. We were mistreated by black teachers, but that's another issue. But the other part was just getting information and resources. The reality is that we have very few physicians, given our population, very few health providers. Part of it is that many of us, like in my school, there weren't any then, and there aren't any now. And that, plus the anti-DEI initiatives and others, have led to a situation where, I mean, a lot of what we're saying today is if it's new, it's not. I'm now old enough to see. I remember having these debates when we were talking about AIDS. I remember having these debates when we were talking about polio and so forth. That there's a strong medical mistrust in our community. It's a driving factor behind a lot of this anti-vaccine stuff, and it's not because folks are not having access. It's because they don't trust those folks who call themselves physicians who are providing treatment in the things that they're saying. And there's a strong historical basis to that. The Tuskegee thing, people misinterpret it, but it's a background of reality that we have to deal with. And that is that medical science, the technology that's behind it, somehow is not in our interest. And it pops up in a lot of different ways. We found it in terms of research studies. We found it in terms of a lot of areas. And this is also not just an issue for medical care. It's also an issue in terms of geography and where people live. People live in some dangerous places, even though it doesn't make sense. Why? Because of the same kinds of issues, the importance of being amongst ourselves, getting support from each other, versus the risk and the danger of opening our eyes up, getting more information, and moving in a direction that's focused in terms of healthcare and in terms of survival. We talk with, I don't want to go too much about this, but as you know, I'm dealing with substance abuse. Why in the world would someone go out and use stuff where and when you're seeing literally thousands, millions of people dropping dead when they use it? And it's running into the same kinds of issues that healthcare is taking second priority to other things, such as being part of the larger community and what the community feels makes sense versus what reality is saying.
And thank you, Dr. Lawson. We're at the top of the hour, a little bit past. Why don't we go with final comments, starting with Dr. Hines?
So this was a really great discussion, and I look forward to us having another conversation on some of these topics. But I think Dr. Nabert Stevens hit the nail on the head when we talked about the importance of history. I think one of the things that hasn't changed is humans, right? Humans haven't changed. And if you know history, the drivers of human behavior haven't changed. So understanding that and could also hopefully help us, because we've had snake oil salesmen before, right? We've had the proliferation. There's been misinformation before. All of these things have happened in the US alone, let alone in the context of human history. But understanding them, and then to your point earlier, especially as Black people taking control of making sure that our kids know their own African American and African history, right? Because maybe we got a little complacent on what things were being taught in schools and some of those types of things. But I think to the point that was being made before, if anything, this is a time for us to circle the wagons, right? And even if we're not totally excluded from anything else, making sure we're doing a better job of taking care of our people.
Thank you very much. Dr. Walks.
So I am in absolute agreement with Dr. Hines' comments. Let me add this. I like to believe things that make me feel like I'm right and and kind of support what I was thinking in the first place anyway. So somebody told me that there's an old African proverb that one father is worth 1,000 teachers. As a father on Mother's Day, I think that's a great proverb. I hope it is an African proverb. But the point for me is that we do have to sometimes accept the responsibility of knowing more than our kids. We've lived longer than they have. And I told you so may not get a response that makes us their friend, but I told you so sometimes can keep them safe and keep them out of trouble. And sometimes as grandparents, we can tell our kids, better get my grandchild vaccinated. I don't care what you saw and which influencer told you no, but we need to have a very strong conversation about how important it is that you do this. We are very busy trying to fit in everywhere and be friends everywhere. And I think to Dr. Hines' point, one of the ways that we circle the wagons is with standards. These are the things that we expect. I'm happy to celebrate you graduating kindergarten and let's go out and get some food. But we're not going to, have, I don't know, Earth, Wind and Fire or Nelly, or I'm trying to move through all the generations, or Drake come and sing at your kindergarten graduation, because it's going to be ordinary. It's going to be normal and ordinary and routine that you go to college and that you graduate. We are going to expect that in our families, and we're going to help each other, because the other place where you can learn about some science and stuff is during church And when little kids go off to the little church school and there's so many opportunities we have to set normalcy in our families and in our institutions where we attend. I'm not going to accept the fact that we're all going to Hades in a handbasket. Can't do it. Can't do it. I got other stuff to do. I got other fish to fry, other mountains to climb, and I'm not going to leave. I don't care what generation it is, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. I'm not leaving all those generations behind. I'm sorry. I will rant some more next time.
Hey, do I hear Miss Irma being channeled?
Listen, I told my mother that they would only accept one black student into the class of this place I was applying to medical school. This was right after the Bakke decision in California. I said, Mom, they may only let one black person in. My mother said, well, how many seats do you need? That was your friend, Dr. Maxey, Irma Walks.
Name.
Of course, I got to Davis. I was the only black man in the class, but that's a whole nother part of the story. I blame her for that.
Dr. Barbara Davis, first of all, you gave a very excellent presentation. I appreciate you. I know you had a very busy day today, but you knocked out of the park, Dr. Barbara Davis Stevens. Final comments.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that I met the need and your expectation. I would hate to disappoint you ever. I agree with what Dr. Hines said about these are the kinds of conversations now that we need to have a lot of and with a lot of different people. I know that we have limited outreach, but to the degree that we can get more people, they don't necessarily have to come on Sunday, but can see these discussions. We need to get this out there in the atmosphere. We need to talk about what we need to do for ourselves in terms of wellness, whether we're talking about physical or mental wellness, whether we're talking about our families and raising our children. They used to call these fireside chats. I'm not going to call it a fireside chat. I really want to call it a disaster drill because I think we're heading towards disaster. So we need to have some disaster preparation and prevention conversations, and hopefully we can continue this level of conversation in the future.
And thank you. And for my final comments, I'm going to start out with something that's relevant to Dr. Walks and Dr. Lawson. In my church going today, one of the things that struck me that the pastor said, that real prayer to God doesn't come from the head, it comes from the gut. And what we know about SSRIs and the things that affect what's going on in the microbiome, that could very well be true in a theological sense. But also, I want to recall that the person that I call mama and the person that I call my aunt and grandmother always had a way to pray for me and made me be able to dodge a multitude of bullets, not necessarily real metal lead bullets, multitude of trauma that came up during life. And I recall that. And I remember one of the songs that I heard this morning is called Pray for Me. And that's very important as we go forward. I agree with Dr. Walks because I said so. Pray for me. Everybody have a great day. And thank you very much, Simon, for helping. Have a great Sunday afternoon. Happy Mother's Day again. Pray for me.
Bye.
Good day, everyone.
Amen.